My parents left me at a desolate train station in the middle of a snowstorm when I was just 15 years old. They laughed as they rolled up the window, telling me it was a lesson in humility. "Let us see if she is smart enough to find her way home," my father joked. I never went back. 20 years later, they found me again, but they did not find the scared little girl they abandoned in the cold. They found Zora Vance, a forensic accountant who destroys corrupt empires for a living. This morning, I woke up to 59 missed calls from the woman who gave birth to me. She thinks she wants a family reunion. She has no idea she just dialed the number of her worst nightmare. Before I tell you how I made them regret every single ring, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire from the ashes of a toxic childhood. My name is Zora, and at 35 years old, I have built a life that my parents could never comprehend. I sat at the head of the mahogany conference table in my corner office on the 45th floor of a Chicago skyscraper. The view behind me was pure steel and glass, overlooking a city I had conquered through sheer grit and intellect. Across from me sat 3 executives from a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company, sweating through their Italian suits. I slid a blue folder across the polished table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Inside that folder was 50 pages of undeniable evidence proving their chief financial officer was embezzling millions. They were terrified. They were ready to sign anything to keep this quiet. My commission on this single audit would be more than my father made in 5 years of preaching at his megachurch. I picked up my pen, ready to finalize the deal that would secure my firm's reputation for the next decade. Then, my phone vibrated against the table. It was a short, sharp buzz that shattered the professional atmosphere. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again, a relentless, angry rhythm. I glanced down at the screen and my blood ran cold. The name on the display read Genevieve. Not Mom. Genevieve. The woman who valued her social standing over her own flesh and blood. I declined the call. She called back instantly. Then the text messages started flooding in, lighting up my screen one after another. "Zora, pick up the phone. We know you are alive. Stop being a brat and answer me. Your father is losing his patience." I apologized to the executives, forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes, and signed the contract with a steady hand. But inside, I was shaking. I wrapped up the meeting in 2 minutes and practically ran to the elevator. Sliding into the driver's seat of my Porsche Panamera usually calmed me. The smell of expensive leather and the hum of the engine were my reminders that I was safe, that I was successful. But as I merged onto the highway, the Chicago skyline began to blur. I wasn't seeing the traffic ahead of me. I was seeing snow. I was feeling the biting cold of a December night in rural Illinois 20 years ago. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was 15 again, shivering in a thin coat. My father, Bishop Elijah, had stopped the family sedan at a Greyhound station that had been closed for hours. My brother, Darius, was in the back seat, playing with a Game Boy, not even looking up. "Get out, Zora," my father had said, his voice calm and terrifying. "You think you are too good for this family? You think you are smarter than us? Then prove it." He reached into his wallet and threw a crumpled $5 bill out the window. It landed in a puddle of slush. "Find your way home, Zora. Maybe the long walk will teach you some respect." My mother, Genevieve, didn't even turn her head. She just checked her makeup in the visor mirror. They drove off, leaving me alone in the dark. I watched their taillights fade until there was nothing left but the sound of the wind. I stood there for an hour, clutching that dirty $5 bill, waiting for them to come back. They never did. I didn't use that money to go home. I used it to call the police in the next town over. I entered the foster care system that night and erased them from my life. The sudden honk of a semi-truck snapped me back to reality. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. My phone rang again, cutting through the trauma. This time, it wasn't Genevieve. It was Marcus, my personal attorney and the only person in the world who knew my real history. I answered on the car's Bluetooth system. "Zora, we have a major problem," Marcus said, his voice grave. I took a deep breath. "Is it the pharmaceutical deal? Did the CFO run?" "No, Zora. It is about your grandmother." Nana Rose. The name stopped my heart. Nana Rose was the only person in that family who had ever shown me kindness. She used to sneak me cookies when my mother put me on diets. She used to whisper that I was special. I hadn't seen her in 2 decades, but I always hoped she knew I was okay. "She passed away 3 days ago, Zora," Marcus said gently. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. I couldn't grieve now, not on the highway. "I am sorry, Zora, but there is more," Marcus continued, his tone shifting to professional urgency. "She left you everything. The old homestead in Atlanta, all 40 acres of it. But there is a catch." "What catch?" I asked, merging into the fast lane. "Your parents are at the courthouse right now. They are filing a petition to declare you legally dead. They have a hearing in 48 hours. They have faked a death certificate, Zora. They claim you died as a runaway teen years ago. They are trying to erase your existence so they can claim the inheritance and sell the land to a commercial developer." I slammed on the brakes, pulling onto the shoulder of the highway. Gravel crunched beneath my tires. My breath hitched in my throat. They didn't just abandon me. Now they were trying to kill me off on paper for a paycheck. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "How much is the land worth?" "That is the thing, Zora. On paper, it is just dirt. But I did some digging. There is a proposed government contract for that area. That land is worth $50 million, and your parents know it." I looked at the glove compartment. Inside, wrapped in plastic, I still kept that crumpled $5 bill from 20 years ago. It was my reminder, my fuel. "I am not dead," I whispered to the empty car. "And I am definitely not lost anymore." "Zora?" Marcus asked. "What do you want me to do?" I put the car in gear and spun the steering wheel, making an illegal U-turn across the highway. "Do not do anything, Marcus. I am coming to Atlanta. My parents want a ghost? Fine. I will be the ghost that haunts them until they have nothing left." I checked the time. 48 hours. That was all the time I had to drive south, infiltrate their lives, and stop the biggest fraud of their careers. I wasn't going home for a reunion. I was going to war. And this time, I wasn't the one who was going to be left out in the cold. Ms. Vance was not just a pseudonym. She was a suit of armor forged from 20 years of silence and cold calculation. I sat in the dim light of my hotel room, adjusting the collar of my silk blouse and checking my reflection in the laptop screen. I had pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun and put on thick, black-rimmed glasses that hid the shape of my eyes. The woman looking back at me was sharp, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. She was exactly the kind of person my parents feared and worshipped in equal measure. I took a deep breath, composed my features into a mask of professional indifference, and clicked the link to join the video conference. The screen flickered for a moment before resolving into a high-definition view of the office I had been banned from 2 decades ago. My father, Bishop Elijah, sat behind his massive oak desk like a king on a throne. Behind him, shelves of leather-bound theological books were displayed prominently, purely for aesthetics. My mother, Genevieve, sat beside him, her posture rigid, wearing a pastel suit and a string of pearls that I knew were bought with church donations. Seeing them again, pixelated but alive, sent a jolt of electricity through my veins. It was not love. It was not even hate. It was the adrenaline of a hunter spotting prey. "Ms. Vance," my father's deep, booming voice filled my speakers. It was the same voice he used to command thousands of followers every Sunday. The same voice that told me I was worthless in a snowstorm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us on such short notice. We have heard incredible things about your ability to handle delicate financial situations." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression unreadable. "Please, Bishop, save the pleasantries. My hourly rate is $2,000 and the clock is already ticking." "You mentioned a property issue that requires immediate liquidation." My mother flinched at my tone, but my father seemed impressed. He liked sharks. He thought he was one. "Yes, straight to business. I like that." "We have a parcel of land, about 40 acres in the outskirts of Atlanta. It was left to our family by my late mother. We have a buyer lined up, a commercial developer offering a substantial sum. However, there is a complication with the deed." I knew the complication. The complication was me. I typed on my keyboard, pretending to take notes. "And the nature of this complication?" "The deed lists a beneficiary who is unavailable to sign," my mother interjected, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. "My daughter, Zora. She ran away from home 20 years ago. We have not seen or heard from her since. We believe she may have passed away living on the streets. It is a tragedy, truly. We just want to close this painful chapter and use the proceeds to build a new community center for the church." Lies. Every word was a lie. They wanted to sell the land for the lithium deposits, and they needed me declared dead to do it. "I see," I said, keeping my voice flat. "So you need me to audit the estate and structure the sale in a way that bypasses the missing signature until the death certificate is processed." "I can do that. But I will need full access to your personal and church financial records to ensure the IRS does not flag the transaction." My father hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Full access? If you want this done quietly and quickly, yes. Or you can hire a cheaper accountant who will ask moral questions." "I do not ask moral questions. I just balance the books." That was the magic phrase. They exchanged a look of relief. My father nodded vigorously. "You will have everything you need, Ms. Vance. We just need this done before the hearing on Friday." "Excellent," I said. "I will send over the contract." I moved my mouse to the corner of the screen and clicked the button to turn off my camera and mute my microphone. The screen went black on their end, simulating a disconnection, but I did not leave the meeting. I kept the audio feed live. I watched them relax, their shoulders dropping as they thought they were alone in their office. "That woman is cold as ice," my father grumbled, loosening his tie. "But she is exactly what we need." "She is expensive, Elijah," my mother complained, picking up a glass of water. $2,000 an hour? We could have just forged the signature ourselves." "And go to jail? Use your head, Genevieve," my father snapped. "Once she cleans up the paper trail, we sell the land for $50 million. Her fee is pennies, and thank God she does not care about the details." My mother sighed, looking at a photo on the desk. It was a picture of my brother Darius. At least we are doing this for Darius. He deserves that money. Unlike that ungrateful wretch Zora. Can you imagine if she actually showed up? My father laughed, a cruel, dry sound. Zora? That girl was too stupid to survive a night in the real world. I did us a favor leaving her at that station. She was a weed in our garden. If she were alive, she would be nothing but a burden, a lowlife. She certainly wouldn't be sitting in a penthouse like Ms. Vance. I sat there in the silence of my hotel room, listening to them erase my humanity. They didn't just think I was dead. They hoped I was. They viewed my existence as a mistake they had successfully corrected. A weed. A burden. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away instantly. That was the last tear Zora would ever shed for them. Ms. Vance didn't cry. Ms. Vance got even. I reached for the microphone button and unmuted myself. The sound of my typing clattered loudly through their speakers, making them jump. My father knocked over his pen holder. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. "Apologies," I said, my voice cutting through their panic like a razor blade. I seemed to have experienced a brief network error, but I caught the end of that. They froze, their eyes wide with terror. My father stammered, "Ms. Vance, we thought you had left." "How much did you hear?" I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was suffocating. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted them to wonder. "Enough to know you are very motivated sellers," I said smoothly. "Do not worry, Bishop. I told you. I do not care about the morality of your family dynamics. I care about efficiency." They exhaled, the tension leaving their bodies. They thought they were safe. They thought I was just a greedy professional. However, I continued, my voice dropping an octave, electronic records can be tricky. I prefer to work on site. I want to see the physical ledgers, and I want to inspect the property myself. My father frowned. "Is that necessary?" "Absolutely. If I am going to make a missing heir disappear from a legal document, I need to be thorough. Prepare the guest house." I leaned closer to the black screen, my eyes narrowing behind the dark glasses. "I will be arriving tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. Have the books ready. And Bishop?" "Yes?" he squeaked. "Make sure the driveway is clear. I drive a very wide car." I ended the call before they could respond. I sat back, my heart pounding a steady war drum rhythm against my ribs. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. "I am in," I told him. "They have no idea who I am." "Good," Marcus replied. "But be careful, Zora. You are walking into a snake pit." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights one last time before I returned to the darkness of my past. "I am not worried about the snakes, Marcus. I brought the shovel." The iron gates of the estate swung open with a silent, expensive hum. I steered my rental sedan up the winding driveway, my hands gripping the leather wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. 20 years ago, this driveway had been gravel, cracking under the weight of my father's old Ford. Now, it was paved with pristine asphalt, lined with manicured hedges that looked like they were trimmed with nail scissors. The modest brick house I grew up in was gone. In its place stood a sprawling monstrosity of a mansion, complete with Corinthian columns that looked ridiculous in rural Georgia. It was a palace, built on the tithes of the faithful and the tears of the daughter they discarded. I parked the car and took a moment to adjust my wig. It was a sharp, angular bob, jet black, nothing like the unruly curls my mother used to complain about. I put on my dark sunglasses. Ms. Vance was ready. The front door opened before I could even ring the bell. My mother, Genevieve, stood there beaming. She was wearing a cream-colored silk suit that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. Behind her stood my father, Bishop Elijah, trying to look pious while eyeing my designer briefcase. "Welcome, Miss Vance," my mother cooed, reaching out to shake my hand. Her palm was soft. She had clearly never done a day of hard labor in her life. "We are so relieved you are here." I stepped inside, the cool air conditioning hitting my face. The foyer was breathtakingly tacky. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier the size of a small car, and gold leaf accents on the crown molding. It smelled of expensive lilies and old money, or at least the desperate attempt to look like old money. "The house is impressive," I said, my voice flat. My father puffed out his chest. "The Lord has blessed us, Miss Vance. We have been good stewards of his flock." I fought the urge to vomit. Stewards. Right. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the living room, loud, obnoxious, and painfully familiar. "Is that the miracle worker?" My brother Darius sauntered into the hallway. I hadn't seen him since he was 17, playing his Game Boy while I was kicked out into the snow. Now, he was 37, but he looked like an overgrown toddler in a velvet tracksuit. He had gained weight, his face soft and complacent, the look of a man who had never been told no. "Darius, behave," my mother chided, but there was no real discipline in her voice. "This is Miss Vance. She is here to help us with the property issue." Darius stopped in front of me, looking me up and down with a predatory grin that made my skin crawl. He didn't see his little sister. He didn't see the girl he used to ignore. He just saw a woman in a power suit. "Well, hello there," he drawled, leaning against the wall and trying to look charming. "Nobody told me the accountant was going to be a knockout. You can handle my assets anytime, sweetheart." A sharp intake of breath came from the doorway behind him. A woman with icy blonde hair and a face full of filler stepped out. This had to be Tiffany, his wife. She glared at me, then at Darius. "Darius, really?" Tiffany snapped, crossing her arms. "We have a guest." Darius didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes glued to me. "Relax, Tiff. I am just making conversation." "So, Ms. Vance, you from around here? You got a little southern in your voice, hidden under all that corporate ice." I stared at him through my dark lenses. The audacity! He was hitting on his own sister, completely oblivious. It was disgusting. But it was also useful. He was weak. He was distracted. "I am from Chicago, Mr. Brooks," Darius said, extending a hand that was weighed down by a gold Rolex. "Darius Brooks, the son and heir. And you can call me Darius." I did not take his hand. "I am here to work, Mr. Brooks, not to socialize." Darius laughed, pulling his hand back, but not looking embarrassed in the least. "Feisty. I like that. Maybe later I can show you the wine cellar. We have a vintage that needs inspecting." Tiffany let out a noise of pure indignation, but my parents said nothing. They just watched, indulgent smiles on their faces, as if their son's harassment was just a quirky personality trait. The golden child could do no wrong. I walked past him, my heels clicking sharply on the marble. I need to see the layout of the house to understand the assets, I said, changing the subject. I walked into the main living room, and that is when I stopped dead in my tracks. Above the fireplace, dominating the entire room, was a massive oil painting. It was a portrait of the family, commissioned clearly within the last few years. It featured my father sitting in a high-backed chair looking wise. My mother stood behind him, hand on his shoulder. Darius was on the right, looking heroic, and Tiffany was painted in next to him, though she looked slightly out of place. But it was the empty space on the left that made my breath hitch. The composition of the painting was off. There was a strange, dark cloud painted into the background, a patch of shadow that didn't match the lighting of the rest of the piece. I stepped closer, peering at the canvas. Beneath the layers of new paint, I could see the faint outline of a shoulder, a hint of a dress. It was where I should have been. It was where I used to stand in the old family photos. They hadn't just left me out of the painting. They had painted me in, and then, at some point, someone had taken a brush and violently painted me out. They had erased my face with layers of dark oil, turning me into a literal shadow in their perfect life. I felt Darius step up behind me, his breath hot on my neck. "Admiring the art?" he whispered. I pointed a gloved finger at the dark smudge. "Interesting composition," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What is that supposed to be?" Darius glanced at the spot where my face used to be and shrugged, taking a sip of the drink he had suddenly materialized. "Oh, that? Just a mistake. The artist messed up the perspective. We had him cover it up. Nothing important, just dead space." Dead space. That is what I was to them. I turned to face them, a cold smile playing on my lips. "Well," I said, "let us get to the books. I am very good at finding mistakes that have been covered up." Dinner was served in the formal dining room under the glare of the crystal chandelier that I remembered cleaning as a child. The table was set with the good china, the porcelain plates with the gold rim that my mother used to slap my hand away from if I even looked at them too hard. Now, I was the guest of honor, eating roasted duck while my parents watched me with a mixture of fear and fawning admiration. But if my parents were cautiously trying to woo me, my sister-in-law Tiffany had decided that I was the enemy. She sat across from me, picking at her food with the precision of a surgeon, her eyes never leaving my face. Tiffany was a woman who wore her privilege like a weapon. She was dressed in a white silk dress that probably cost more than the average American mortgage payment, and on her finger sat a diamond the size of a grape. I knew exactly which embezzled fund that ring had come from. "So, Ms. Vance," Tiffany began, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet condescension that made my skin crawl. "Elijah tells me you attended Wharton. I must admit I was quite surprised when he mentioned that." I took a slow sip of my water, meeting her gaze evenly. "Why is that, Mrs. Brooks? Wharton is a fine institution." "Oh, certainly," she laughed, a tinkling, humorless sound. "It is just that it is so competitive. They must have had a very robust diversity initiative the year you applied. It is wonderful how they are lowering standards to give people from difficult backgrounds a chance to sit at the table." The room went silent. My father cleared his throat awkwardly, studying his wine glass. My mother smoothed her napkin, pretending she hadn't heard. Darius just chuckled, his mouth full of food, too stupid to realize his wife was insulting the person holding their fate in her hands. I smiled, but inside I was cataloging every word. "Actually," I replied, my voice calm and sharp as a scalpel, "I graduated summa cum laude, top of my class, no quotas, no handouts, just pure, unadulterated merit. Something I am sure you can appreciate, being a woman of such high standing. Tiffany's smile faltered. She didn't like being challenged. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Well, you are certainly very articulate," she said, pivoting to another classic insult disguised as a compliment. "It is so refreshing to deal with someone of your demographic who speaks so correctly. You almost sound like one of us." I saw my mother flinch. Even she knew that was too far. But Tiffany wasn't done. She wanted to assert dominance. She wanted to remind me that no matter how much money Ms. Vance made, in her eyes, I was still beneath her. She held out her empty wine glass towards me, ignoring the full carafe that was sitting 6 inches from her own hand. "Be a dear and top me off, would you?" she commanded, her tone shifting from conversational to authoritative. "The help seems to be taking a break, and you are closer." It was a power move. She was treating the forensic accountant, the savior of the family fortune, like a servant. My father opened his mouth to protest, likely realizing that offending me was a bad business strategy, but I stood up before he could speak. "Of course," I said softly. I picked up the heavy crystal decanter filled with a rich, dark Cabernet Sauvignon. It was heavy in my hand, a solid weight of potential destruction. I walked around the table, my heels silent on the plush rug. I could feel Tiffany's smirk. She thought she had won. She thought she had put me in my place. I stood beside her. I tilted the bottle. The wine began to flow into her glass. I watched the red liquid swirl, and then, with a calculated slip of my wrist, I let the bottle tilt just a fraction of an inch too far to the left. The stream of wine missed the glass entirely. It splashed onto her lap in a heavy, violent wave. The dark red liquid hit the pristine white silk of her dress and bloomed instantly, soaking into the fabric like fresh blood on snow. Tiffany shrieked. It was a high, piercing sound that shattered the tension in the room. She jumped up, her chair clattering backward onto the floor. "You idiot!" she screamed, looking down at the ruin of her dress. "Look what you did! This is Italian silk! It is ruined!" I set the bottle down on the table with a deliberate thud. "Oh, I am so sorry," I said, my voice devoid of any actual apology. "I suppose my hand slipped." Tiffany looked up at me, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, raw rage. The facade of the polite society wife was gone. The venom that she usually kept hidden under passive-aggressive comments came pouring out. "You did that on purpose," she hissed, her hands shaking as she tried to dab at the stain with a napkin. "I knew I couldn't trust you. I told Darius you were trouble." "Tiffany, please," my father stammered, standing up. "It was an accident." "It was not an accident!" she yelled, turning her fury on me. She glared into my eyes, and for a second, she forgot who I was supposed to be. She just saw a target. "I should have known better than to let you near me," she spat, her voice trembling with hate. "You people are all the same. You come into our houses acting like you belong, but you are just clumsy, incompetent, black trash." The room went dead silent. The slur hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My parents looked horrified, not at the racism, but at the potential lawsuit. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell back. I just reached into the pocket of my blazer and tapped the screen of my phone. The recording app had been running for the last 10 minutes. I smiled, a cold, terrifying expression that made Tiffany take a step back. "I have everything I need, Tiffany," I said, my voice barely a whisper. including that. After the dinner disaster, Tiffany stormed off to salvage her dress, and Darius retreated to the living room to nurse a bourbon and his bruised ego. I did not give my parents time to recover. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer, and turned to my father. "The evening has been entertaining, Bishop, but I need to see the historical records, specifically the tax returns and property maintenance logs from the year your daughter disappeared. If we are going to claim she died, we need to prove she ceased to be a financial dependent on that exact date." My father hesitated, his eyes darting toward the hallway door that led to the basement. "The older files are in storage, Miss Vance. It is dusty down there. Perhaps I can have Darius bring them up in the morning." I shook my head. "I prefer to pull the files myself. It ensures the chain of custody is preserved. Unless, of course, there is something down there you do not want your auditor to see." The threat was subtle but effective. My father stiffened. "Of course not. Follow me." He led me to the narrow door under the main staircase. As he unlocked it, a smell wafted up: musty paper, damp concrete, and the metallic tang of old copper. It was the smell of my childhood. This basement had been my bedroom. While Darius had the sunny room with the balcony upstairs, I had been relegated to the underground, next to the furnace. We descended the wooden stairs. They used to creak under my weight when I tried to sneak out at night. Now, they had been reinforced with steel. When my father flicked on the fluorescent lights, I gasped internally. My old room was gone. The twin bed, the second-hand desk, the posters I had taped up to cover the cracks in the cement, all erased. In their place were rows of metal shelving units packed with bankers' boxes, and in the corner, where my wardrobe used to be, stood two massive, fireproof safes. This wasn't just storage. This was a vault. This was where a man of God hid the things he didn't want God to see. "It is a bit cluttered," my father muttered, moving a stack of papers off a plastic chair. "We keep the church's discretionary funds here." Discretionary funds. That was a polite way of saying laundered money. I scanned the room, my forensic eyes already picking out discrepancies. Unmarked boxes, cash wrappers on the floor. But then, my gaze landed on something in the far, shadowy corner, tucked behind a dehumidifier. It was a doll. It was a ragged, handmade thing with yarn hair and a missing button eye. I felt a phantom punch to the gut. That was Bella. I had made her when I was 7 because my mother refused to buy me toys. I had stitched her together from scraps of old altar cloths. I thought my father had thrown her in the trash the day they drove me to the train station. Without thinking, I walked over and picked it up. The yarn felt rough against my manicured fingers. "You kept it," I whispered, my voice losing its corporate edge for a split second. "Bella." The silence that followed was deafening. I froze, realizing my mistake instantly. I had used the name only Zora knew. I turned around slowly. My father was staring at me, his eyes narrowed, his body tense. The bumbling old man act dropped, revealing the calculating predator underneath. He took a step toward me. "How did you know that name?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. My heart slammed against my ribs. I tightened my grip on the doll. "Excuse me?" I asked, feigning confusion. "The doll," he said, pointing a shaking finger. "You called it Bella. That was what Zora called it. Nobody knew that name, not even her mother. She only whispered it to the thing when she thought we weren't listening. So tell me, Ms. Vance, how do you know the secret name of a dead girl's toy? The air in the basement grew thin. He was suspicious. If he figured it out now, alone in this soundproof basement, I wouldn't make it out. I needed a lie, a perfect, logical, unemotional lie. I let out a short, dismissive laugh and tossed the doll back into the corner. Bishop, really? You are being paranoid. I walked toward him, closing the distance, using my height and my heels to loom over him. I did not call it Bella. I said, "You kept it?" "The bell." I pointed to a small, tarnished brass bell sitting on the shelf right next to where the doll had been. It was an old church bell, likely stolen. I noticed it in the inventory list you sent me last week, I lied smoothly. Item 402, brass bell, antique. I was surprised you kept such a low-value item stored next to whatever is in those safes. My father blinked. He looked at the bell, then back at me. The tension in his shoulders didn't fully dissipate, but the logic held. He wanted to believe I was just an accountant. He didn't want to believe his past was haunting him. Yes, he stammered. It is an heirloom. Right, I said, brushing past him to the shelves. Now, let us focus. Where are the property records? He pointed to a stack of boxes labeled 2005. I started rifling through them, my hands shaking slightly but my movements precise. I needed to get him out of here. Why don't you go check on your wife, Bishop? I said. I work faster alone, and honestly, the humidity down here is terrible for your suit. He lingered for a moment, watching me, but eventually the lure of the comfort upstairs won out. Fine, he grunted. Bring the files up when you are done. Do not touch the safes. He turned and walked up the stairs. I waited until I heard the heavy door click shut and the lock turn. He locked me in. He thought he was securing his money. He didn't realize he had just locked the fox in the henhouse. I exhaled a breath I had been holding for 5 minutes. That was too close. I looked back at the doll in the corner. I'm sorry, Bella, I whispered. I will come back for you. I turned back to the boxes. I didn't care about the tax returns. I needed the truth. I began opening the unmarked boxes on the bottom shelf, the ones hidden behind the innocent-looking hymnals. Inside, I found ledgers, real ledgers, gambling debts, payoffs to city council members. But then, my fingers brushed against a black folder at the very back of a crate. It wasn't dusty. It had been handled recently. I pulled it out. The label was handwritten in my mother's elegant, swirling script. Project Parking Lot, Zora, Elimination Plan. My blood ran cold. Elimination Plan. Not Zora's file, not missing person. Elimination. I opened the folder. The first page wasn't a legal document. It was a timeline, dated 3 months ago. Step 1. Locate Zora's last known address. Step 2. Fabricate death certificate via contact at county clerk. Step 3. Secure Miss Vance for audit to legitimize the estate. I stared at the paper. They hadn't just found me by accident. They had been planning this. But then I turned the page and my stomach dropped. There was a photo. A grainy photo taken from a distance. It was a photo of me. Not Zora the teenager, me, Miss Vance, walking into my office building in Chicago 2 weeks ago. Beneath the photo, a note in my father's handwriting. She changed her name. She thinks she is safe. Hire her. Bring her here. If she does not sign, we finish what the winter storm started. They knew. They didn't know I was Zora. They knew Miss Vance was the target. Or did they? No, the note was ambiguous. They knew Miss Vance was the key, but the photo... Why did they have a photo of me? I heard a sound from the top of the stairs. The lock clicked. The door opened. "Miss Vance?" My father's voice called down, echoing against the concrete walls. "Darius says he forgot something down there. He is coming down." I shoved the folder into my waistband, buttoning my blazer to hide it. I had walked into a trap within a trap. I wasn't the hunter. I was the bait. And now, I was locked in a basement with the monster who had been waiting 20 years to finish his meal. The damp folder containing the elimination plan burned against my skin as I climbed the stairs from the basement. I had the smoking gun, but a gun is useless if you do not pull the trigger. I needed to trap them in a crime so undeniable that even their expensive lawyers could not save them. I needed them to coerce Zora, the vulnerable runaway, into signing away her rights. I walked into the kitchen where my parents were anxiously waiting. I adjusted my glasses and put my mask of indifference back in place. "I have good news," I announced, placing my briefcase on the counter. "My private investigators have located the beneficiary. Zora is in the city." My mother gasped, dropping her teaspoon. Is she coming here?" I nodded. "I have arranged for her transport. She is hesitant, of course. She seems to be in a difficult financial situation. I told her there was a small stipend involved if she signed the waiver. She will be here within the hour. But I must leave to prepare the filings. I will return once the signature is secured to notarize the documents." My father looked relieved, practically giddy at the thought of the impending sale. "Excellent work, Ms. Vance. Truly excellent. We will handle the girl. You just get the paperwork ready." I walked out to my car, their praise ringing in my ears. I drove 2 miles down the road to a secluded truck stop where I had stashed a bag in the trunk. It was time for a costume change. I stripped off the silk blouse, the tailored blazer, and the Italian heels. I removed the severe black wig and the glasses. I scrubbed the expensive makeup off my face, leaving my skin bare and vulnerable. I pulled on a pair of faded, oversized jeans from a thrift store and a gray hoodie that smelled faintly of stale tobacco. I tied my natural hair up in a messy, frayed scarf. I looked in the rearview mirror. Ms. Vance, the powerful executive, was gone. In her place was Zora, the struggling, broken woman they wanted me to be. The transformation was not just physical, it was psychological. I slumped my shoulders, letting the posture of defeat take over. I left the Porsche behind a diner and walked to the bus stop. Riding the public bus back toward my childhood home was a surreal nightmare. The smell of diesel and sweat replaced the scent of leather. I sat in the back, clutching a worn-out backpack, watching the landscape shift from city grit to the manicured lawns of my parents' neighborhood. I was an actress, walking onto a stage of my own making, but the fear in my stomach felt dangerously real. I walked the last mile to the estate. The sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows across the driveway. When I reached the iron gates, they did not open automatically. I had to buzz. "Who is it?" My father's voice crackled over the intercom. "It is me," I whispered, making my voice tremble. "Zora." The gate clicked open. I walked up the long, paved driveway, my sneakers scuffing against the asphalt. The house loomed ahead, a fortress of judgment. As I reached the front steps, the massive oak door swung open. My mother stood there. She looked different than she had an hour ago. The welcoming smile she had worn for Ms. Vance was gone. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure disgust. I hesitated on the bottom step. "Mom?" She moved faster than I expected. She flew down the steps, and before I could even raise a hand to protect myself, her palm connected with my cheek. The sound was a sharp crack that echoed in the quiet evening air. The pain was instant and searing. Hot tears springing to my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer shock of the violence. "You ungrateful little wretch," she hissed, looming over me. "You finally decided to crawl back out of the gutter?" I held my cheek, looking up at her. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She hit me. I came because the lady said, "Shut up," she snapped, grabbing my arm with a grip that bruised. "Do not speak to me. You are here for one reason, to fix the mess you made by running away. You are going to sign those papers, and then you are going to get out of my sight." She dragged me into the foyer, the same foyer where Ms. Vance had been offered tea and compliments just hours before. The contrast was a physical blow. My father and Darius were standing in the living room. Darius looked at me with a sneer, shaking his head. "Look at her," Darius laughed. "She looks like a stray dog. I told you she wouldn't amount to anything." My father didn't even look me in the eye. He just pointed to the dining room table. "The papers are there. Sign them." I looked into the dining room. The table was still set with the fine china from Miss Vance's lunch. Her water glass was still half full. They had treated a stranger, a paid employee, with the utmost respect, offering her their best wine and their most charming smiles. But for their own daughter, their flesh and blood, they had nothing but violence and contempt. I looked at the spot where Ms. Vance had sat, the ghost of my other self mocking me. They loved the lie I had created, but they hated the truth of who I was. I realized then that there was no redemption for these people. I wasn't just here to get a signature. I was here to burn this entire house of cards to the ground. I lowered my head, hiding the fire in my eyes, and shuffled toward the table. "Okay," I whispered, playing the part. "I will sign." But as I reached for the pen, I saw Tiffany watching me from the doorway, wearing a fresh dress. She was holding her phone, recording. "Smile for the camera, sweetie," Tiffany said. "We want proof you were of sound mind when you gave us everything." I gripped the pen, my knuckles white. Oh, I would give them everything, all right. Everything they deserved. The moment the red light on Tiffany's phone blinked off, the performance ended. She lost interest in me immediately, turning back to inspect the wine stain on her dress. I reached for the pen to sign the waiver, ready to play my part and leave, but a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was Darius. His grip was not affectionate. It was desperate. "Wait," he said, his voice rough. "Not yet. I need a word with my baby sister first." My mother frowned, looking up from her tea. "Make it quick, Darius. Ms. Vance is coming back soon to notarize the papers. We need this done." Darius ignored her. He dragged me away from the table, his fingers digging into my bicep through the thin fabric of my thrift store hoodie. He didn't lead me to the living room or the kitchen. He pushed me out the French doors into the dark, sprawling garden. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and impending rain. This garden used to be my sanctuary, the only place I could hide from their criticism. Now, it felt like an interrogation room. Darius marched me to the far edge of the patio, into the shadows of a large oak tree where the security lights didn't reach. He let go of me, pacing back and forth, running a hand through his thinning hair. He looked frantic. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. I rubbed my arm, feigning fear. "What do you want, Darius?" I asked, keeping my voice small. "I said I would sign." He stopped pacing and looked at me. He didn't look at me with relief or brotherly concern. He looked at me like I was a tool he had found in the garbage, a tool he could use to fix a mess he had made. "I do not care about the land, Zora," he hissed, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Dad can have his church parking lot. I have bigger problems, real problems." He took a drag, the cherry of the cigarette illuminating his pale, terrified face. "I need money, Zora. Fast cash. Do you have anything?" I almost laughed. I was standing there in clothes I bought for $5, pretending to be destitute, and he was asking me for a loan. He was wearing a watch worth more than the average car, but he was the one begging. "I have nothing, Darius," I whispered. "You see me. I took the bus here." He cursed under his breath, kicking at a stone. "I knew you were useless. I told them you would come back empty-handed." He looked back toward the house, watching Tiffany through the glass doors. She was yelling at a maid. His eyes narrowed, and a dark, ugly idea seemed to form in his mind. "Listen to me," he said, stepping closer. "You are going to do something for me. You owe me. I was the only one who didn't want to leave you at that station. I tried to stop them. Liar." I remembered him playing his Game Boy. I remembered him laughing. But I nodded, playing along. "What do you need?" Darius lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am in a hole, Zora. A deep one. I owe some bad people $500,000. Gambling, stocks, it does not matter. They gave me until tomorrow. If I do not pay, they are going to break my legs. Or worse." He grabbed my shoulders again. "Tiffany has a necklace, a sapphire pendant. It is in the safe in the bedroom. It is insured for $80,000. It is not enough to cover everything, but it buys me time. I need you to take it." My stomach churned. He wanted me to be his thief. "You want me to steal from your wife?" "No," he said, shaking his head frantically. "I will open the safe. You just take it. Put it in your bag. Walk out of here. I will report it stolen tomorrow. I will tell the police you took it." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted to frame me. He wanted to use my return, my vulnerability, to cover his own crimes. "You want to send me to jail?" I asked, letting a tear slide down my cheek. "Darius, I just got back." He squeezed my shoulders harder, his fingers digging in painfully. "You are leaving anyway," he snapped. "You are a ghost, remember? You sign the papers, you disappear. You take the necklace, sell it at a pawn shop for me, and keep 1,000 for yourself. Then you run. The police won't look hard for a runaway. You are already the black sheep, Zora. One more stain won't matter." "But for me? I have a reputation. I am the future of this family. I cannot be seen stealing from my own wife." I pulled away from him, stepping back into the darkness. "No, Darius, I won't do it. I signed the waiver. I am done. I am not going to prison for you." The desperate look in his eyes vanished, replaced by something cold and menacing. The mask of the panicked brother fell away, revealing the same cruel bully he had been at 17. He took a step toward me, towering over my hunched form. "You think you have a choice?" he threatened, his voice dropping to a low growl. You think anyone cares what happens to you? You are here because we allowed it. You are breathing because we haven't decided to stop you yet. He lunged forward, grabbing the front of my hoodie and slamming me back against the rough bark of the oak tree. The air left my lungs in a rush. You will take that necklace, Zora, he spat, his face inches from mine. Or you won't make it to the bus stop. I will make you disappear again. And this time, nobody is going to find you. Not in 20 years. Not ever. Do you understand me? I looked into his eyes, recording every word on the device hidden in my pocket. I saw the violence there. I saw the fear. And I saw my victory. I understand, Darius, I whispered, trembling. Good, he said, releasing me and smoothing down my hoodie with a mocking pat. Now go inside, be a good little sister, and wait for my signal. He walked back toward the house, leaving me alone in the dark. He thought he had broken me. He had no idea he had just handed me the hammer to smash his life into pieces. The next morning, I returned to the estate not as the broken sister in a hoodie, but as Ms. Vance, the financial shark in a $3,000 suit. I had spent the night uploading the audio of Darius threatening me to a secure server, but I knew that was not enough. To bring down the entire house of cards, I needed to expose the rot in every single pillar of this family. And today, my target was Tiffany. I set up my command center in the library, spreading the church's charitable donation ledgers across the mahogany desk. My father had given me access to everything, believing I was there to hide his sins, not expose them. He was so focused on the land deal that he had forgotten about the smaller, pettier crimes happening right under his nose. I opened the file labeled the Good Shepherd Orphanage Fund. It was supposed to be a restricted account, funded by the congregation to provide school supplies and clothes for foster children. But as I ran the numbers, the math simply did not work. There were monthly withdrawals of $15,000 labeled as consulting fees paid to a vendor called P&L Logistics. I did a quick background check on my laptop. P&L Logistics did not exist. It was a shell company with a registered address that turned out to be a UPS box in a strip mall. I traced the banking routing number associated with the payments. It linked directly to a private account at a credit union in Buckhead. And the debit card activity on that account was fascinating. It was not spent on school books or winter coats for orphans. It was spent on trips to the Hermès boutique, spa weekends at the Ritz-Carlton, and recurring payments to a man named Jackson, who listed his occupation as private tennis instructor. I heard the click of heels in the hallway. Tiffany breezed into the library, looking refreshed and arrogant, wearing a new silk dress to replace the one I had ruined. She held a cup of coffee, looking at me with disdain. "Working hard, Ms. Vance?" she asked, not bothering to hide her sneer. "Or just figuring out how to bill us for another hour?" I did not look up from the ledger. "I am actually admiring your commitment to philanthropy, Mrs. Brooks. The Good Shepherd Fund is quite active." Tiffany froze mid-step. Her grip on the coffee cup tightened. "Oh?" "Yes, well, the bishop loves the children. We do what we can." I swiveled my chair around to face her, holding up a printout of the bank statement. "I am sure the children appreciate it," I said, my voice smooth and dangerous. "Although I am curious why the orphans require so many Birkin bags. And who exactly is Jackson? Does he teach the orphans tennis?" Tiffany's face went pale. The arrogance drained out of her, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. She rushed to the door, slamming it shut and locking it. She turned back to me, her chest heaving. "Keep your voice down," she hissed, marching over to the desk. "Who showed you that?" "Nobody showed me, Tiffany. I am an auditor. Finding money is what I do. You have embezzled nearly $200,000 from the church over the last 18 months. That is a federal crime. Wire fraud, tax evasion, theft." She trembled, looking at the door as if expecting my father to burst in. "You do not understand. I have expenses. Darius gambles everything away. He gives me nothing. I have to maintain appearances. I am the bishop's daughter-in-law. I cannot be seen wearing last season's fashion." I leaned back, crossing my legs. "So you steal from orphans to buy handbags? That is your defense?" Tiffany's eyes darted around the room, looking for a way out. Then she looked at me. She saw a woman in an expensive suit, a woman who had already agreed to help her corrupt father-in-law hide assets. She made a calculation. She thought I was just like her. She took a deep breath and smoothed her hair. "Listen, Ms. Vance, you are a businesswoman. You understand how the world works. Nobody needs to know about this. The church brings in millions. This is a drop in the bucket." She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. "I can make it worth your while. If you bury this, if you categorize these expenses as, say, community outreach, I will give you half of what is in the account right now. And moving forward, we can split the monthly withdrawal, 50-50. That is $7,000 a month for you, just for looking the other way." I stared at her. It was pathetic. It was disgusting. And it was exactly what I wanted. She was offering me a bribe. If I accepted, I would have a paper trail linking her directly to the crime and proof that she tried to corrupt an auditor. I let a slow, greedy smile spread across my face. I tapped my pen against the desk, pretending to consider it. 50-50? I asked. Tiffany nodded eagerly, thinking she had hooked me. "Yes, cash. Or crypto. However you want it. Just keep the old man out of it. He would cut me off if he knew." I stood up and extended my hand. "You have a deal, Tiffany. I will reclassify the expenses as marketing consultation, but I want the first payment wired to my offshore account by noon today, to prove trust." She let out a breath of relief and shook my hand. Her palm was clammy. "Done," she said, smiling like a conspirator. "I knew you were smart. We are going to get along just fine, Ms. Vance." I watched her leave the room, a bounce back in her step. She thought she had just bought an ally. She had no idea she had just signed her own confession. I looked at my hand, resisting the urge to sanitize it. "Agreed, Tiffany," I whispered to the empty room. "We are partners now. Partners in your destruction." After securing the bribe from Tiffany, I retreated to the guest cottage to shed the skin of Miss Vance and slip back into the hooded sweatshirt of Zora the Runaway. The physical transformation was exhausting, but the psychological whiplash was worse. I had to dim my light, hunch my shoulders, and dull my eyes. I had to become the failure they needed me to be. My personal attorney, Marcus, had arranged a drop. He could not come to the front gate without blowing my cover, so he had posed as a food delivery driver. I met him at the service entrance, taking the greasy paper bag with trembling hands. Inside, beneath a stack of cold fries, was a thick envelope sealed with red wax. It was the original copy of my grandmother's will and, more importantly, a geological survey commissioned by a federal agency 3 months prior. I took the envelope into the pantry, the only room in the house without a security camera. I tore it open, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew my grandmother loved me, but I had assumed the land she left me was just sentimental. A place to plant a garden, a place to be safe. I was wrong. I unfolded the geological map. It was covered in heat signatures and mineral density charts. A bright red circle encompassed the entire 40 acres of the estate. In the margins, the surveyor had written a single word that changed everything. Lithium. The land was not just dirt. It was sitting on top of one of the largest unmined lithium deposits in the state, the mineral essential for electric vehicle batteries, the mineral that was currently trading at record highs. I quickly scanned the appraisal document attached to the back. Estimated value, $50 million. My breath hitched. This was not just about a parking lot. My parents had lied to me. They had lied to the congregation. They claimed they wanted to sell the land to build a community center, a holy endeavor. But I flipped to the next page, a corporate registration document Marcus had dug up. The buyer listed on the sale contract was a company called Genesis Development, LLC. I recognized the address. It was the same P.O. box my father used for his private slush fund. He was not selling the land to a developer. He was selling it to himself. He was going to buy it from the estate for pennies, claiming it was worthless swampland, and then, once he owned it free and clear, he would lease the mining rights for $50 million. He was going to steal my inheritance and turn it into an empire, all while preaching about poverty and humility on Sundays. The door to the pantry swung open violently. I gasped, trying to shove the papers back into the envelope, but I was not fast enough. My father stood there, his frame filling the doorway. He was not wearing his priestly robes. He was in his shirt sleeves, his face flushed with wine and rage. He looked at the papers in my hand. He saw the map. He saw the red circle. "Give me that," he growled, stepping forward. I clutched the papers to my chest, backing up until I hit the shelves of canned goods. "This is Grandma's will," I whispered, my voice shaking, not with acting, but with genuine fury. "She left it to me. She knew about the lithium, didn't she? That is why she gave it to me, to protect it from you." My father laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "To protect it? You stupid girl. Rose was senile. She didn't know what she was sitting on, but I did. I have known for years. I prayed for this. This is God's reward for my service." He lunged at me, grabbing my wrist with a strength that surprised me. I struggled, but I had to maintain the charade of the weak, malnourished daughter. I let him wrench the papers from my hand. He didn't even look at them. He just tore them in half, then in quarters. The sound of the thick paper ripping was like bones breaking. He threw the confetti of my inheritance onto the dirty floor and stomped on it with his polished Oxford shoe. "It does not matter what paper you found, Zora," he sneered, leaning in close enough for me to smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You are a ghost. You have no rights. You have no voice." He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look him in the eye. "You think a piece of paper matters in this house? You think the law applies here? I am the bishop. I am the shepherd, and you are just a lost sheep that needs to be sheared." He released me with a shove that sent me stumbling into a rack of spices. "Tomorrow morning, you will sign the official waiver in front of Ms. Vance. You will smile. You will take your bus fare, and you will leave. Because if you try to show anyone these scraps of paper, I will not just lock you in the basement. I will bury you under it." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open. "In this house, my word is law," he shouted back over his shoulder. "And God does not listen to sinners like you." I stood there, surrounded by the torn pieces of the truth. He thought he had destroyed the evidence. He thought he had broken my spirit. But he had made one fatal error. He forgot that Ms. Vance had already scanned the originals. And he forgot that while God might not listen to sinners, the IRS certainly did. The kitchen was silent except for the aggressive ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My father had composed himself after his outburst in the pantry, smoothing his shirt and putting his mask of benevolence back on. He placed a fresh document on the granite island. It was the waiver I had drafted myself as Ms. Vance, a legal masterpiece designed to strip Zora of every single right she possessed. "Sign it," my father said, sliding a gold fountain pen across the counter. I looked at the paper. It was a death warrant for my identity. By signing this, I would be agreeing to a settlement of $5,000 in exchange for waiving all future claims to the estate. $5,000 for a $50 million lithium mine. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back my rage. I looked up at my mother. She was watching me with arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. She wanted this over. She wanted to go back to her life of luncheons and spa days, unburdened by the daughter she despised. "I cannot do it," I whispered, dropping the pen. My mother stopped tapping her foot. "Excuse me?" I said no. I raised my voice slightly, letting a hint of Zora's old defiance bleed through. "I know what this land is worth. I know about the lithium. Grandma Rose wanted me to have it." The air left the room. My father's face went a shade of purple I had never seen before. He slammed his hand onto the counter, making the toaster jump. "You ungrateful little parasite!" he roared. "You think you can blackmail us? You think you can waltz in here after 20 years and dictate terms to me?" He rounded the island, grabbing me by the upper arm. His grip was bruising. "We offered you a way out, Zora. We offered you mercy. But you are just as stubborn and stupid as you were at 15. He began to drag me toward the back door. I dug my heels into the expensive tile, but he was strong, fueled by greed and adrenaline. My mother opened the door, holding it wide as he shoved me out into the night. "Where are you taking me?" I cried out, struggling against him. "To the place where you belong," he spat. They marched me across the lawn, past the manicured gardens, past the pool where Darius used to host his parties, all the way to the edge of the property. There stood an old corrugated metal shed. It used to be where the groundskeeper stored fertilizer and broken tools. It had no windows. It had no insulation. It was a metal box designed to trap heat in the summer and cold in the winter. Darius was waiting there. He had opened the padlock. He looked at me with cold indifference, tossing the keys to my father. "Have fun, sis," Darius sneered. "Maybe a few days in the dark will help you find your signature." My father shoved me inside. The smell hit me instantly. Rust, mold, and chemicals. I stumbled, falling onto the dirty concrete floor. I turned around just as he grabbed the heavy metal door. "Please," I begged, playing my part to the bitter end. "It is freezing. There is no water." "That is the point," my mother said, stepping into the light of the doorway. She looked down at me like I was a stain on her shoe. "You will stay here until you sign. If it takes a day, fine. If it takes a week, fine. Nobody knows you are here, Zora. Nobody cares. Just like old times. She smiled. It was a cruel, satisfied smile. Think about it, honey. The pen will be waiting. My father slammed the door. The sound was like a gunshot. I heard the heavy padlock click shut, sealing me in absolute darkness. I heard their footsteps crunching away on the gravel, laughing as they went back to their warm house and their stolen fortune. I lay on the cold floor for a moment, listening until the silence was total. They thought they had won. They thought they had trapped a helpless woman in a metal box. They thought I was cut off from the world, invisible and voiceless. Slowly, I sat up in the dark. I stopped shivering. I brushed the dirt off my knees and stood up. I reached up to the collar of my flannel shirt and touched the second button from the top. It looked like cheap plastic, but it was not. It was a high-definition, wide-angle lens connected to a transmitter sewn into the lining of my hoodie. I tapped the button twice to confirm the signal. A tiny, imperceptible vibration against my chest told me everything I needed to know. I looked directly into the darkness, knowing that miles away, in a secure conference room in Chicago, my entire legal team was watching on a 60-inch monitor. I knew Marcus was recording every frame. They had seen the assault. They had heard the threats. They had witnessed the kidnapping. I am not alone, I whispered to the invisible audience. I imagined the look on Marcus's face. I imagined the federal agents he was currently coordinating with. My parents had just committed a felony on live stream. They wanted a show? I was going to give them the season finale they never saw coming. I leaned back against the cold metal wall and waited. The clock was ticking, but this time, it was ticking for them. The metal walls of the shed amplified the silence until it was deafening. I sat in the corner, pulling my knees to my chest to conserve body heat. It had been 3 hours since they threw me in here. The temperature was dropping, and the damp cold of the concrete floor was seeping into my bones. I was not afraid. I was angry. But I had to push the anger down deep, burying it under layers of fear. I had to stay in character. The camera hidden in my button was still rolling, broadcasting my misery to my legal team in Chicago. I needed one more piece of evidence. I needed a confession from the woman who gave birth to me. I heard the crunch of gravel outside. The heavy padlock rattled, and the door creaked open, admitting a slice of blinding moonlight and the silhouette of my mother. Genevieve stood there, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, holding a flashlight in one hand and a paper plate in the other. She shone the light directly into my eyes, blinding me. "Still here?" she asked, her voice light and conversational, as if she were checking on a potted plant. I shielded my eyes, squinting up at her. "Mom? I am hungry. Please." She stepped inside, careful not to let her expensive suede boots touch the dirty parts of the floor. She tossed the paper plate at my feet. It landed upside down, spilling its contents onto the concrete. It was a half-eaten hamburger and a few cold French fries. I recognized the smell immediately. It was the leftovers from the meal Darius had been eating earlier. "You are hungry?" she scoffed. "You should be grateful. I was going to give this to the dog, but I thought his stomach was too sensitive for grease. You, on the other hand, have spent 20 years eating garbage, so you should be used to it." I looked at the food in the dirt. I did not touch it. I looked up at her, letting my lip tremble. "Why do you hate me?" I whispered. The question was not acting. It was the question that had haunted me for 2 decades. "I never did anything to you. I was just a child." Genevieve sighed, a long, dramatic exhale of annoyance. She leaned against the doorframe, looking at her fingernails. You were not just a child, Zora. You were a mistake. Do you have any idea what you did to me? I was beautiful before you. I was a pageant queen. I had a waist the size of a ring. Then you came along. You ruined my body. Stretch marks, C-sections. You took my beauty and you gave me nothing in return. Darius was a sweet baby. He smiled. He was easy. You? You just screamed. You were needy and ugly and loud. Every time I looked at you, I saw the end of my youth. She spoke with such casual cruelty that it took my breath away. She did not hate me for my actions. She hated me for my existence. Is that why you did it? I asked, my voice cracking. Is that why you left me at the train station? Genevieve laughed. It was not a nervous laugh. It was a genuine, bubbling sound of amusement. She shone the flashlight on my face again, enjoying my pain. Oh, that night, she said, smiling as if recalling a fond memory. That was the highlight of my year. Your father was so stressed about money back then, and you were just whining in the back seat about being cold. We just looked at each other and said, let's see if she can survive. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Do you want to know the best part? When we drove away, I looked in the side mirror. You were running after the car. You looked so small. You were waving your arms, crying, slipping on the ice. You looked like a little rat drowning in a storm. I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. We laughed about it for a week. It was the funniest joke of my life. I sat there, frozen. The camera on my chest recorded every word. She had just admitted to child abandonment and endangerment, and she had framed it as a comedy routine. You are a monster, I whispered. No, honey, she said, turning to leave. I am a survivor, and you are just a loose end. Enjoy your dinner. She slammed the door shut. The lock clicked. Darkness swallowed me again. I waited until her footsteps faded slightly. I reached into the hidden lining of my boot and pulled out my second phone. It was a burner, untraceable, but connected to the same encrypted network as my main device. My hands were shaking, but I forced my fingers to type. I was not Zora the victim anymore. I was Miss Vance, the executioner. I opened the messaging app and selected the contact labeled Mother. I typed, I have prepared the final filings for the county clerk. Has the girl signed the waiver yet? I am on a tight schedule. I hit send. Through the thin metal walls of the shed, I heard a muffled ping from outside. I heard Genevieve stop walking. I imagined her pulling her phone out of her pocket. I imagined her reading the message from the respectful, powerful, wealthy Miss Vance, the woman she admired, the woman she wanted to be. I heard her footsteps turn back toward the house, faster this time. Not yet, Miss Vance, she muttered, loud enough for me to hear through the walls. But she will. I sat back against the cold metal, a dark smile spreading across my face. She thought she was texting her savior. She had no idea she was texting the rat she tried to drown. And the rat was about to bite back. The sun rose over the estate, casting long, pale beams of light across the granite countertops of the kitchen. But there was no warmth in the Brooks household that morning. I arrived at 9 sharp, dressed in a navy suit that was tailored to intimidate. I carried a leather briefcase that felt heavier than usual, not because of its contents, but because of the destiny it held. The air in the kitchen was thick with tension. My father was pacing by the bay window, looking older and more haggard than I had ever seen him. My mother was sitting at the island, aggressively stirring sugar into her tea, the clinking of the spoon the only sound in the room. Darius was there too, drumming his fingers on the table, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. They looked like cornered animals waiting for the hunter to arrive. I placed my briefcase on the table with a deliberate thud that made my mother jump. "Where's the beneficiary?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. "I have a filing deadline at the county clerk office in 2 hours. If the waiver is not signed by noon, the deal collapses. The investors walk away." My father stopped pacing. He looked at me, then glanced nervously at the back door. He did not want to admit that he had locked his daughter in a freezing metal shed all night and failed to break her spirit. He did not want to admit that his power, which he wielded so effectively from the pulpit, was useless against a woman who had nothing left to lose. "She is unavailable," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "She is being stubborn. She refuses to listen to reason. We need more time." I checked my watch, letting out an exaggerated sigh of frustration. "Bishop, I do not have time for stubbornness, and neither do you. The developers are already skittish. If we do not have that signature today, you lose the $50 million. The land stays in probate for years." The mention of the money was the trigger I knew it would be. Darius slammed his hand onto the granite counter. "I am not losing this money because that little rat wants to play the victim," he shouted, standing up. He grabbed the blank waiver form I had left the day before. "Who cares if she signs it? She is a ghost, right? You said it yourself, Dad. She does not exist. Nobody has seen her signature in 20 years. Who is going to know the difference?" My father looked at him, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Darius, be careful. That is fraud. If the audit traces it back, it is only fraud if we get caught," Darius snapped, his voice rising in pitch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper. I recognized it immediately. It was an old report card of mine from middle school that they must have dug out of the basement files. He smoothed it out on the counter, studying the loop of the Z in my name. "I can do this," he said, a manic glint in his eyes. "I used to sign her name on permission slips when we were kids so she could go on field trips without Mom knowing. I know her hand better than she does." He looked at me, daring me to object. "Ms. Vance, you just need a signature, right? You are a pragmatic woman. You do not care whose hand holds the pen as long as the ink dries." I held his gaze, keeping my face impassive. Inside, my heart was racing. This was the moment, the line in the sand. If he did this, there was no going back. It was not just moral corruption anymore. It was a federal felony committed in front of a witness. "I am an auditor, Mr. Brooks," I said coolly. "I verify documents. I do not witness their creation. If the signature matches the records on file, my job is done." Darius grinned, a predatory smile that showed too many teeth. He took that as permission. He hunched over the paper, the tip of the gold fountain pen hovering over the signature line. He took a deep breath, mimicking the focus of a master artist. Then he began to write. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was agonizingly loud. He moved slowly, carefully replicating the slant, the pressure, the slight hesitation I used to have when writing my name as a terrified teenager. He was not just forging a signature. He was stealing my identity one stroke at a time. He finished with a flourish and sat back, sliding the paper toward me. There, he said, looking proud of himself. Zora Brooks. I picked up the document. I adjusted my glasses and leaned in close, examining the wet ink. It was terrifyingly good. He had captured the essence of my handwriting perfectly. It was the skill of a sociopath who had spent a lifetime lying to get what he wanted. I looked up at him. A small, appreciative smile played on my lips. "You are quite the artist, Darius," I said softly. "The curvature of the B, the spacing. It is remarkable." It looks exactly like hers. If I did not know better, I would swear she was sitting right here in this room. Darius beamed, preening under the praise. "See? I told you. I saved the deal. I always save this family." My mother let out a breath she had been holding, her shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank God. Now just stamp it, Miss Vance. Let us get this over with." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my notary stamp. This was the final nail in their coffin. By notarizing a signature I knew to be forged, I was technically breaking the rules of my profession. But as part of a federal sting operation sanctioned by the FBI, I was securing the evidence that would put them away for decades. I inked the stamp. I hovered it over the paper, right next to the wet ink of Darius's crime. I pressed down. Thump. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a judge's podium. The red seal of approval sat stark and bright on the page, locking their fate. "It is done," I said, closing the folder and snapping the latches of my briefcase. "The sale is authorized." Darius laughed, walking over to the liquor cabinet and pouring himself a drink, even though it was not yet 10 o'clock. "To the parking lot," he cheered, raising his glass. "To being rich." I watched him drink, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. He wasn't toasting to a parking lot. He was toasting to a prison cell. And he had just signed the reservation himself. The ink on the forged waiver was barely dry when the Brooks estate exploded into a frenzy of vanity. The gala was less than 4 hours away, and the house had been transformed into a staging ground for a theatrical production where my family played the saints and I was cast as the sinner saved by their grace. Makeup artists and hairstylists hired from Atlanta rushed through the hallways, carrying cases of expensive products, while florists arranged massive bouquets of white lilies that smelled like a funeral. I stood in the hallway, still wearing my dirty hoodie and thrift store jeans, looking like a stain on a pristine white tablecloth. My mother, Genevieve, stopped directing the caterers long enough to look at me with sheer revulsion. She did not see a daughter. She saw a prop that needed to be cleaned before the curtain went up. "Go upstairs and scrub the poverty off you," she commanded, pointing a manicured finger toward the servants' staircase. "You smell like the shed. The water is hot, but do not use the guest towels. Use the ones in the utility closet. And Zora, do not take too long. We have a rehearsal at 4. I walked up the back stairs, my legs heavy, not from fatigue, but from the weight of the secrets I was carrying. I entered the small bathroom attached to the guest room where they were keeping me. I turned on the shower and watched the steam rise. I stripped off the dirty clothes that had been my costume for the last 24 hours. As the hot water hit my skin, I scrubbed hard. I washed away the dirt from the shed. I washed away the feel of Darius's hands on my shoulder. I washed away the sting of my mother's slap. I was not just cleaning my body. I was purifying myself for the battle to come. I was washing away Zora the victim so that Ms. Vance the avenger could emerge spotless. When I stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a thin, rough towel, the door to the bedroom flew open without a knock. It was Tiffany. She was already in her gala attire, a shimmering silver gown that hugged every curve, bought with money stolen from orphans. She held a plastic garment bag in her hand like it was a dead animal. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust at my wet hair and bare face. "Make it quick," she snapped, throwing the bed. "We do not want to be late. The press is going to be there, and Elijah wants the family entrance to be perfect." I looked at the bag. "Is that my dress?" I asked, keeping my voice low and submissive. Tiffany laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Do not get excited, sweetie. We could not exactly put you in couture. It would ruin the narrative. You are the prodigal daughter, remember? You are supposed to look humble, broken, grateful." She unzipped the bag and pulled out the dress. It was a dull, lifeless gray. The fabric was cheap polyester that would itch against the skin. It had a high collar and long sleeves, shapeless and severe. I recognized it immediately. It was not a dress bought for the occasion. It was an old uniform that belonged to the housekeeper they had fired 5 years ago for getting arthritis. "You want me to wear a maid's uniform?" I asked, staring at the gray heap on the bed. Tiffany smirked, tossing the dress at me. It struck my chest and slid to the floor. "It fits your station in life, Zora. Besides, it covers up your lack of breeding. Put it on. And do not try to fix your hair too much. The messy look sells the tragedy better. We want the donors to open their checkbooks out of pity, not admiration." She walked to the door, pausing to look back at me one last time. Her eyes were full of malice. She enjoyed this. She enjoyed reducing me to nothing. "Do not embarrass us tonight, Zora," she warned. "You play your part. You cry when the bishop hugs you. You look down when the cameras flash. And tomorrow, you take your $5,000 and you disappear. If you ruin this, I will make sure Darius finishes what he started in the garden." She slammed the door, leaving me alone with the gray dress. I picked it up off the floor. The fabric felt coarse against my fingers. It smelled of mothballs and old despair. They wanted to parade me around in a servant's cast-offs to emphasize their own magnificence. They wanted me to be the visual representation of their charity. I walked to the mirror, holding the ugly dress up against my body. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were dark and hard. There was no fear left in them, only calculation. I let the dress fall from my hands onto the floor. I stepped over it and walked to the closet where I had hidden my duffel bag earlier that morning during the chaos of the caterer's arrival. I unzipped it slowly. Inside, beneath a layer of old newspapers, shone the fabric of my reality. A tailored white suit. Sharp, immaculate, powerful. The kind of suit a woman wears when she owns the room, not when she cleans it. I looked back at the closed door where Tiffany had just exited. She thought she had stripped me of my dignity. She thought she had defined me with a gray polyester rag. "Do not worry, Tiffany," I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady and cold. "I will wear the gray dress for the entrance. I will play the part. But for the finale, I will be wearing something much more suitable." I reached into the bag and touched the cool silk of my lapel. Tonight I was not dressing for a party. I was dressing for a funeral. And I was going to look spectacular while I buried them. The grand ballroom of the estate had been transformed into a spectacle of religious opulence. Tables draped in white linen were arranged in concentric circles around a raised stage, and the air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. I stood near the catering entrance wearing the scratchy gray maid's uniform that Tiffany had thrown at me. I kept my head down and my hands clasped in front of me, playing the role of the broken penitent daughter to perfection. Guests drifted past me without a second glance. To them, I was just a prop in the background of Bishop Elijah's triumph. They sipped champagne and whispered about how saintly the family was for taking in such a troubled soul after 20 years of silence. From my vantage point, I watched my parents work the room. My father looked regal in his ceremonial robes, shaking hands with senators and local celebrities. My mother was a vision of maternal grace, dabbing fake tears from her eyes whenever anyone asked about her long-lost daughter. They were performing the greatest show of their lives, selling the image of a perfect, forgiving family while hiding the rot beneath the floorboards. But the real VIPs were just arriving. A hush fell over the room as the double doors opened to admit the delegation from the investment firm. Leading the group was a tall, silver-haired man with eyes like flint. To my father, he was Mr. Sterling, the managing partner of the development group poised to buy the lithium-rich land. To me, he was Arthur Sterling, the CEO of the forensic accounting firm I worked for, and the man who had taught me everything I knew about destroying white-collar criminals. He walked into the room with the confidence of a lion entering a pen of sheep. My father rushed over to greet him, practically bowing in his eagerness. "Mr. Sterling, welcome to our humble celebration." My father beamed, grasping Arthur's hand with both of his. "We are so honored you could join us on this momentous night." Arthur smiled a shark-like expression that did not reach his eyes. "The honor is mine, Bishop. My team is eager to finalize the transaction. I understand your auditor, Ms. Vance, has approved the due diligence." My father puffed out his chest at the mention of my alter ego. "Ah, yes, Ms. Vance, a truly remarkable woman, sharp, efficient, and utterly professional. She is currently upstairs finalizing the last of the digital transfers. She speaks very highly of the potential here. We are lucky to have found someone of her caliber to handle our affairs." I almost laughed out loud. He was praising the executioner who was sharpening the axe for his neck. Arthur nodded slowly, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on me. I felt a jolt of electricity. He knew exactly where to look. "And this must be the daughter," Arthur said, gesturing toward the shadowed corner where I stood. "The one the proceeds will benefit." My mother stepped forward, linking her arm through Arthur's and guiding him toward me like she was showing off a zoo exhibit. "Yes, this is Zora," she sighed, her voice dropping to a tragic whisper. "Poor dear. She has had a very difficult life on the streets. Mental instability, you understand. She barely speaks. We are just grateful we can provide a safe haven for her in her final years. We are selling the land primarily to fund her care facility." I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, letting my shoulders slump. I let them paint me as the invalid, the charity case, the cautionary tale. Arthur stopped in front of me. He towered over my mother, ignoring her chatter. He looked at me with a respect that no one else in the room possessed. "Hello, Zora," he said, his voice deep and steady. My father chuckled nervously. "Oh, do not bother Mr. Sterling. She is in one of her moods. She likely does not even know who you are." Arthur ignored him. He took my hand, the one with the calluses from the cold metal shed, and bowed slightly, as if greeting royalty. He leaned in close, pretending to offer a word of comfort to the poor, crazy girl. "The perimeter is secure," he whispered so softly that only I could hear. The FBI tactical team is in position behind the stage. The federal warrants are signed. We are just waiting for your signal. I squeezed his hand once, a silent confirmation. Arthur straightened up and turned back to my parents, a polite smile plastered on his face. She seems very lucid to me, Bishop. In fact, I think she is ready for her close-up. My father laughed, oblivious to the doom hanging over his head. Wonderful. Let us get this started then. He walked away, leading Arthur to the VIP table. I watched them go, my heart pounding a war rhythm against my ribs. They thought the show was about to begin. They were right. But they had no idea I was the one directing the final act. I smoothed the rough fabric of my gray dress. It was almost time to take the stage. The dressing room behind the stage was a small, windowless box that smelled of stale hairspray and desperation. I stood alone in front of the full-length mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman I did not recognize. The gray polyester dress hung off my frame like a shroud, shapeless and ugly, designed to strip me of my gender and my dignity. My hair was purposely disheveled, my face scrubbed clean of makeup to highlight the shadows under my eyes. I looked exactly like the broken, discardable thing my family needed me to be. I looked like Zora, the runaway who had crawled back home to die. I reached out and touched the cold glass of the mirror. The sensation sent a shockwave through my body, transporting me back 20 years to a different kind of cold. I was 15 again, standing on the cracked pavement of the train station, my breath misting in the freezing air. I remembered the sound of the wind howling through the empty platform. I remembered the sting of the snow against my cheeks. But mostly, I remembered the sight of the red taillights of my father's car fading into the distance. That was the moment I learned that love was conditional, but survival was solitary. They had left me in the cold to teach me a lesson about power. They wanted me to freeze. They wanted me to break. I looked back at my reflection and my lip curled into a sneer. They thought that cold had killed me. They were wrong. That cold had preserved me. It had frozen my heart and turned it into a weapon. The girl who cried at the train station was gone. The woman standing in the mirror was not a victim. She was a reckoning. I grabbed the high collar of the gray dress. My knuckles turned white as I tightened my grip. I did not just want to take it off. I wanted to destroy it. I wanted to destroy everything it represented. The subservience, the silence, the shame. With a primal growl that started deep in my chest, I ripped the fabric. The sound of tearing polyester was loud and satisfying like a bone snapping. I tore the dress down the middle, shredding the maid uniform until it fell in a heap around my ankles. I kicked it away, stepping out of the pile of gray rags with a sense of liberation that made my head spin. Underneath the ugly costume, I was wearing my armor. I smoothed the lapels of the white silk suit I had worn underneath. It was tailored to perfection, hugging my body with sharp architectural lines. It was pristine. It was powerful. It was the color of a blizzard. It was the color of the ghost they claimed I was. In this suit, I was not Zora the runaway. I was Ms. Vance, the partner at a top-tier firm. I was the woman who made CEOs sweat and corporations crumble. I was the woman who had already signed the warrants for their arrest. But the world was not ready to see Ms. Vance yet. The curtain was about to rise, and the audience was expecting a tragedy, not a thriller. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out an oversized, moth-eaten wool coat. It was the coat I had worn on the bus ride here, the coat that smelled of the streets. I swung it over my shoulders, buttoning it all the way up to my chin, hiding the white suit completely. I pulled the hood up, casting my face in shadow. I looked in the mirror one last time. To the naked eye, I was a huddled mass of misery. But inside the cocoon of that dirty coat, a butterfly with steel wings was waiting to emerge. I was a Trojan horse, built of flesh and blood, and I had already breached the gates. Through the thin walls, I heard the swell of the organ music. It was a triumphant hymn, the kind my father loved to play when the collection plates were being passed around. The applause began, a polite ripple that grew into a thunderous wave. They were clapping for the image of the perfect family. They were clapping for the lie. A knock came at the door. It was a stagehand. "You are on in 30 seconds, he called out. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the expensive lilies that lined the hallway. They smelled like a funeral. And in a way, it was. Tonight, we were burying the Brooks family legacy. I opened the door and walked into the wings of the stage. The lights were blindingly bright. I could see the silhouettes of my family standing center stage. My father stood tall and proud, holding a microphone. My mother stood beside him, clutching a handkerchief. Darius and Tiffany were posed slightly behind them, looking appropriately solemn. They looked like a tableau of grace. They looked like predators who had just finished a meal. The music faded to a hush. My father raised his hand, silencing the room. He pitched his voice low and emotional, the practiced tone of a man who sold salvation for a living. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "we have gathered here to celebrate 30 years of faith. But tonight, we also celebrate a miracle of restoration. God has tested our family. He has put us through the fire. But he has also brought us through the storm." He turned toward the wing where I was standing. He extended his hand, a welcoming gesture that looked benevolent to the crowd, but felt like a summons to the gallows to me. "Please welcome home our beloved daughter, the one who was lost and now is found, Zora." I stepped out of the shadows. The spotlight hit me. I walked toward them, dragging my feet slightly, playing the part for 10 more seconds. I walked into the lion's den, not as a meal, but as the one holding the whip. The stage lights were hotter than I remembered, cutting through the gloom of the auditorium like searchlights finding a fugitive. I walked to the center, Mark, my head bowed low, hiding my face inside the deep hood of the moth-eaten coat. My father, Bishop Elijah, placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was meant to look comforting to the hundreds of donors watching, but I felt the warning in his grip. He squeezed hard enough to bruise, digging his fingers into the rough wool. He pulled me close, suffocating me with the smell of his expensive cologne and his even more expensive lies. He raised his other hand to silence the crowd. His voice boomed through the speakers, rich with practiced emotion. "Scripture tells us that love keeps no record of wrongs," he preached, looking out at the sea of faces. "And tonight, we live that truth. My daughter Zora has returned to us, broken by the world. She has made mistakes, terrible mistakes. She has walked paths of darkness that no child of God should ever know." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. I saw women dabbing their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. They saw a saint rescuing a sinner. They did not see the wolf holding the lamb. My father continued, feeding off their adoration. "But we do not judge. We simply open our arms. We welcome her back, not because she deserves it, but because we are called to show mercy to the least of these." I felt my mother step up to my other side, dabbing at her dry eyes. She sniffled loudly into her microphone, performing the role of the grieving matriarch. "We just want her to be safe," she added, her voice trembling. "We are selling the family land to build a facility to help lost souls, just like Zora. A center for the broken, a place for the unlovable." The applause was deafening. It was a thunderous ovation for their performance. My father looked down at me, a triumphant smirk hidden from the crowd. "Smile," he hissed under his breath, digging his thumb into my collarbone. "Say thank you." I slowly reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He resisted for a fraction of a second, surprised by my initiative, but he let go, thinking I was about to grovel. I stood there, holding the cold metal of the microphone, feeling the weight of the moment. The room went silent, waiting for the poor, crazy girl to speak. The air conditioner hummed. The ice clinked in glasses. I lifted my head. I let the hood fall back. I looked directly into the camera lens, broadcasting this lie to the world. I did not look broken. I did not look unlovable. I looked straight at my father, and for the first time in 20 years, he saw the fire in my eyes. "Thank you, Bishop," I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing through the hall without a tremor. "Your words are truly inspiring. You talk about truth. You talk about the light. So I think it is only fair that we shine some real light on this family." I reached for the buttons of the old coat. One by one, I undid them. My father's smile faltered. His eyes darted to the side, looking for security, but it was too late. My mother took a step forward, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Zora, what are you doing?" she whispered loudly, her voice laced with panic. I let the heavy wool coat slide off my shoulders. It fell to the floor in a heap of gray misery. Underneath, I was gleaming. The white silk suit caught the stage lights, making me glow with a terrifying brilliance. I stood tall, my posture shifting instantly from the slump of a victim to the command of a prosecutor. I adjusted my lapels and smoothed my hair, revealing the face of Ms. Vance, the woman they feared, the woman they respected, the woman they thought was their accomplice. The audience gasped. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. They were not looking at a charity case anymore. They were looking at power. My father took a step back, his face draining of color. "You," he stammered, the microphone at his side, picking up his fear. "It is you." I smiled, a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. I turned back to the crowd, my voice ringing out with authority. "I have a gift for you, Father. I have a gift for everyone here. It is a little movie I made during my stay. I think you are going to find it very educational." I raised a small remote control and pointed it at the giant screen behind us. "Let us watch together." I pressed the button with the same casual elegance I used to sign multi-million-dollar contracts. The giant LED screen behind us, which was supposed to display a montage of the family's charitable deeds, turned black for a split second before resolving into a grainy night vision shot. The image was undeniable. It was the interior of the metal shed on the edge of the property. The timestamp in the corner read, 24 hours ago. My mother's voice boomed through the ballroom sound system, amplified to a deafening volume. It was the footage from the button camera I had worn the night before. On screen, the Genevieve standing next to me in her gala gown was seen wearing a cashmere shawl, standing over a shivering figure on a dirty floor. Her voice was crystal clear, dripping with cruelty. "That night was the highlight of my year," she said on the screen, her face illuminated by a flashlight. "You looked like a little rat drowning in a storm." I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. It was the funniest joke of my life. The gasp that tore through the room was not polite. It was visceral. It was the sound of 300 wealthy donors realizing they were in the presence of a monster. My mother froze on stage, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at the screen, then at the crowd, her eyes wide with terror. The video did not stop there. It cut sharply to a sunlit scene in the kitchen. The quality was perfect now, showing the morning light hitting the granite countertops. Darius was hunched over a document, a gold pen in his hand. His voice filled the silent auditorium, arrogant and reckless. "It is only fraud if we get caught," he said on the screen, grinning at the camera. "I know her hand better than she does." The video zoomed in on his hand, perfectly forging the signature, Zora Brooks, on the waiver. The footage ended with him laughing and saying, "To being rich." The screen went black for a heartbeat, leaving the room in a silence so heavy it felt like it would crush my ribs. My father, Bishop Elijah, stood paralyzed. The microphone slipped from his sweaty hand and hit the stage floor with a loud screech of feedback that made everyone flinch. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the light of his arrogance extinguished completely. He looked small. He looked ruined. Then the silence was shattered. "Turn it off!" Tiffany screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. She lunged toward the tech booth at the side of the stage, her silver dress shimmering as she stumbled in her high heels. She hacked the computer. "This is a deep fake. It is AI generated. She is lying. Turn it off right now, you idiots!" I watched her scream, feeling a cold calm settle over me. She was fighting a landslide with a teaspoon. "I am afraid it is not a fake, Tiffany," I said into my microphone, my voice cutting through her shrieks. "And I am not done yet." I pressed the button again. The screen lit up once more. This time it was not a video. It was a series of spreadsheets. They were high-definition scans of the church's financial records, placed side by side with personal bank statements. I stepped to the side, allowing the audience to see the full scope of the betrayal. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, pointing to the screen, "you were told your donations to the Good Shepherd Orphanage Fund were buying coats and books for children. Let us follow the money." A bright red line animated across the screen, tracing the path of a $15,000 withdrawal. It moved from the charity account to a shell company called P&L Logistics, and then finally settled into a personal debit account. Next to the transaction, I displayed the receipts. Hermes of Atlanta, $6,000. The Ritz-Carlton Spa, $3,000. Private tennis lessons, $2,000. The crowd erupted. Angry murmurs turned into shouts. I saw a senator stand up looking furious. I clicked the remote again, showing another slide. This one showed Darius's gambling debts. $2 million siphoned directly from the church building fund into an offshore online poker account. The bishop's family was not saving souls, I said, looking directly at the camera. They were stealing them. They were funding a lifestyle of luxury on the backs of your faith and my suffering. Tiffany stopped screaming. She stared at the screen, seeing her own shopping habits broadcast to the world. She looked at Darius, who was shaking his head, muttering, "No," over and over again. They were exposed, naked in their greed before the very people they needed to impress. But the final slide was yet to come. I clicked the remote one last time. And for those wondering about the land sale, I said, the screen changed to show the geological survey I had rescued from the trash. The massive red circle indicating the lithium deposit, and next to it the contract showing my father selling it to himself for pennies. You were not donating a community center, I said, turning to face my father. You were building a mine, and you were willing to bury your own daughter to break ground. The geological survey remained on the screen, glowing like a neon sign of their corruption. But I was done looking at the past. I turned my back on the digital evidence and faced the people who had created it. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a predator walks into a room and everyone stops breathing to see who will be eaten first. My father looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He was trying to reconcile the image of the daughter he had thrown away with the woman standing before him in a white silk suit. He looked at the sharp tailoring, the confident posture, and the cold intelligence in my eyes. And then he looked at the empty spot in the wing where Ms. Vance was supposed to be standing. I saw the realization hit him. It started in his eyes, a flicker of confusion that rapidly grew into a dawn of absolute horror. He looked from me to the screen, where the name Ms. Vance was listed as the auditor. Then he looked back at me. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "It was you, the whole time." I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. My mother flinched, thinking I was reaching for a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out a heavy leather wallet and flipped it open. The gold badge of a senior forensic accountant gleamed under the stage lights next to a government-issued identification card that read, Zora Vance. "I did not die in the cold, Mom," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "I survived. I went to school. I changed my name, and I built a career catching people exactly like you. You spent 20 years trying to erase Zora Brooks from existence. You thought she was a weed. You thought she was a stain. But when you needed someone to help you bury your dirty secrets, you did not call a stranger. You called your own daughter. You just didn't recognize her, because you never bothered to really look at me when I was yours." I took a step closer to Darius, who was leaning against the podium for support, looking like he was about to vomit. "You paid me $2,000 an hour to investigate you, Darius," I said. "You handed me the keys to the kingdom. You gave me the passwords. You showed me where the bodies were buried. You thought I was helping you build a parking lot, but I was just digging your grave." I turned to the audience, raising my badge high so everyone could see. "The waiver my brother forged is void," I announced. "The sale is fraudulent. The land does not belong to the church. It does not belong to the Genesis Development Corporation, and it certainly does not belong to Bishop Elijah." I lowered my hand and looked my father dead in the eye, delivering the words I had practiced in the mirror for a decade. "I am not the prodigal daughter returning for a handout. I am Zora Vance, the legal owner of the land you are standing on, and the person who just put you all in prison." My father lunged forward, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and panic. "You cannot do this," he screamed, losing all semblance of his holy persona. "I am your father. I am a man of God. You are nothing but a—" His words were cut off by a sound that sliced through the tension like a knife. From outside, the stained glass windows came the wail of sirens. Not one, not two, but a chorus of them. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high windows, painting the ballroom in the colors of the law. The doors at the back of the hall burst open. The FBI had arrived. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They exploded inward under the force of federal authority. Dozens of agents in windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI poured into the room, moving with a synchronized precision that terrified the wealthy donors. The gala, which moments ago had been a sanctuary of self-congratulation, instantly transformed into a crime scene. I stood center stage in my white suit, watching the chaos unfold with the detached calm of a conductor watching his symphony reach its crescendo. My sister-in-law Tiffany was the first to break. The moment she saw the badges, her facade of arrogance crumbled into pure animalistic panic. She did not look at her husband. She did not look at her in-laws. She grabbed the skirt of her shimmering silver gown and made a desperate run for the side exit. But in her greed, she had chosen a dress with a train long enough to rival a royal wedding. As she scrambled down the stairs, her heel caught in the expensive fabric. She went down hard, tumbling onto the red carpet in a heap of silk and sequins. 2 female agents were on her in seconds. Tiffany kicked and screamed, thrashing like a trapped fish. "Get off me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? My husband forced me to do it. I am a victim here. I have rights." The agents ignored her, dragging her to her feet and pulling her arms behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and final, cutting through her protests. Darius was even more pathetic. The man who had threatened to bury me in the garden the night before was now cowering behind the podium, sobbing uncontrollably. When an agent approached him, he threw his hands up, surrendering before they even spoke. "It was them," Darius wailed, pointing a shaking finger at our parents. "It was Mom and Dad. They made me sign it. They threatened to cut me off. I am just the son." I did not know anything. "Please, I can testify against them. Just do not arrest me." I watched him sell out his creators without a second of hesitation. The Golden Child had turned into the primary witness for the prosecution in under 30 seconds. But my father, Bishop Elijah, refused to go down without a sermon. He stood his ground, puffing out his chest, trying to summon the authority he had wielded for 30 years. He held up a hand toward the lead agent as if he could stop the federal government with a blessing. "How dare you!" he bellowed, his voice booming. "This is a house of God. I am a bishop. I have immunity in this sanctuary. You cannot touch a man of the cloth." The lead agent, a man who looked like he had eaten concrete for breakfast, stepped onto the stage. He did not blink. He spun my father around and slammed him against the podium, the wood groaning under the impact. "Elijah Brooks, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and the kidnapping of Zora Vance." The agent recited loud enough for every donor in the room to hear. "You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you start using it immediately." My mother, Genevieve, did not scream. She did not run. She stood frozen, staring at the handcuffs on her husband's wrists as if they were alien objects. When an officer approached her, she offered her hands meekly, her spirit completely broken by the public humiliation. The agents began to march them out. The procession passed right in front of me. I stood still, my hands clasped behind my back, looking at them with dry eyes. Tiffany spat at the ground near my feet as she was dragged past. Darius refused to look at me, keeping his head down and weeping. My father glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, his lips moving in a silent curse. But my mother stopped. She dug her heels into the carpet, forcing the officer to pause for a second. She looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara, her perfect pageant hair falling in messy strands around her face. She looked at the daughter she had thrown away, and then at the woman who had destroyed her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine confusion. "We are family, Zora. We gave you life. Why would you do this to your own blood?" I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, empty silence where my love for them used to be. I did not answer her. I did not owe her an answer. I simply nodded to the officer, indicating he could take her away. As she was pulled toward the exit, the flashing lights of the police cars outside illuminated the room, casting long shadows that finally swallowed them whole. 3 months is a long time in the world of high society, but it is an eternity inside a federal penitentiary. The heavy steel door buzzed loudly, and I stepped into the visitation room of the correctional facility. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale despair. I sat down on the visitor side of the reinforced glass partition. I was not wearing the white suit of Ms. Vance today, nor was I wearing the rags of Zora the runaway. I was wearing a simple cashmere sweater and jeans. I was just Zora, free, whole, and finally at peace. On the other side of the glass, the door opened, and 2 guards escorted my parents into the room. The transformation was shocking. Bishop Elijah Brooks, the man who used to thunder from the pulpit in Italian silk, was now hunched over in a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair, once dyed jet black to hide his age, was now entirely gray and thinning. My mother, Genevieve, shuffled behind him. Without her makeup, her fillers, and her expensive jewelry, she looked like a stranger. She looked old. She looked tired. The arrogance that had defined her existence had been scrubbed away, leaving only a bitter, frightened woman. They sat down. They picked up the phone receivers. Their hands were shaking. "Zora," my father said, his voice raspy and weak. "Thank God you came. You have to help us. The public defender is useless. They froze our assets. We cannot pay for a real lawyer. You have money. You have connections. You have to get us out of here." My mother leaned close to the glass, her eyes pleading. "Please, honey, it is a nightmare in here. The food, the people. I cannot survive this. We are your parents. We made a mistake, but surely we have paid enough." I listened to them beg. For 20 minutes, I just let them talk. I listened to their excuses. I listened to them blame Darius, who was in a different cell block, for turning on them. I listened to them blame the government. I listened to them blame me. They had not changed. They were just sorry they got caught. When they finally ran out of breath, I leaned forward. "I did not come here to bail you out," I said softly into the receiver. "And I did not come here to gloat." My father frowned, confusion wrinkling his forehead. "Then why are you here?" "To return something," I said. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small, clear plastic bag. Inside was a piece of paper that was soft with age and stained with the dirt of a train station floor. It was the $5 bill, the same bill my father had thrown out the car window 20 years ago, the bill that was supposed to be my entire worth. My father's eyes widened as he recognized it. My mother gasped, covering her mouth. I smoothed the plastic bag against the glass. "You gave this to a 15-year-old girl in a snowstorm," I said, my voice steady. "You told her it was a lesson. You told her she had to learn the value of $1. Well, I learned." I learned that $5 is not enough to buy a meal, but it is enough to buy a phone call to the police. I learned that $5 cannot buy a coat, but it can buy a bus ticket away from hell. I looked my father in the eye. "Do you remember what you said to me that night, Dad?" You laughed. You rolled up the window and you said, "Let us see how she finds her way home." My father looked down, unable to hold my gaze. "Well," I continued, "I found it. I found my way home to myself. I found my way to a life where I am respected and safe. And I did it without your money and without your name." I slid the $5 bill through the small slot at the bottom of the partition. It landed on their side of the table. "Now it is your turn," I said. My father stared at the crumpled money. "What is this?" he whispered. "Startup capital," I replied. "That is $5. Consider it a loan. Use it at the commissary. Use it to make a phone call. I really do not care, but that is all you are ever going to get from me." I stood up. I felt lighter than air. "You told me to find my way home," I said. "Now let us see how you find your way out of prison with $5. Good luck." "Zora, wait!" my mother screamed, slamming her hand against the glass. "Do not walk away, Zora!" I hung up the receiver. I turned my back on them. I did not look back as the guards moved in to escort them back to their cells. I walked out of the prison and into the bright, blinding sunshine. The air outside tasted sweet. My attorney, Marcus, was waiting for me by the car. He held the clipboard. "Is it done?" he asked. "It is done," I said. I took the pen he offered and looked at the document on the clipboard. It was the deed to the 40 acres of land. I signed my name at the bottom, Zora Vance. "File it," I told him. "Transfer the title to the state immediately. The Zora Vance Home for Children. Make sure the plans include a warm bed for every child and a kitchen that never runs out of food." Marcus smiled, taking the clipboard. "It will be taken care of." I got into my car. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up. It was a call from the prison. The caller ID read, "Inmate call." I picked up the phone. I pressed the button to block the number. Then I tossed the phone into my purse. I started the engine. The low hum of the motor was the only sound I needed. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the highway. The road ahead was open and empty. I drove toward the horizon where the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of gold and violet, leaving the shadows of the past far behind me in the rearview mirror, where they belonged. Zora's journey reminds us that our value is never defined by those who fail to see it, even if they share our blood. The coldness of abandonment can either freeze your heart or forge your resilience. She proved that the ultimate revenge is not screaming to be heard, but silently building an empire they can no longer ignore. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is outgrow the people who tried to keep you small. Your history is not your destiny. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after a betrayal? Share your story in the comments below, and please like and subscribe for more tales of resilience and justice.